when
the
we get a
decision
cold
being made.
Did I put, I might not have put,
I remember
Also, I don't care what they do with changing their rules of
it's
procedure.
entirely possible that I didn't.
those kind of things, like kind of sweatshirt things, but
The other thing too is the rules of procedure change. They didn't actually vote on that. That's not on today's agenda. So until it goes on the agenda, that was not official either.
I'll wait for those to.
Oh, yeah, they wanted to
get on
use it, they
sale.
wanted to do it this thing, I said no.
Right. So that's not happening. So also the ordinance
Yeah,
says
I
in the
just,
form
you know,
approved by
it's
the
one of
city
those things,
attorney,
like I
which
said, I
means
mean, I
no matter
was,
what
you know,
the
blessed
approves,
where,
I can change the
you know,
substance of
I
the
could
ordinance.
family and
Well, good,
worry about
because
it.
And I will.
That about
I
McDonald's,
remember,
right?
like,
How they have
after
their
we
double
went
drive-through, they
Yeah,
were
that's for
saying,
that.
No.
we told them they had to do it right. I'm saying they must have done it right,
Oh, I
right?
did.
You did.
Unless they let them slip.
Yeah.
This is because we
You did.
lived,
I saw it.
This one right away.
Of course,
when they
nobody
went
goes to check, so
raised by my grandparents.
Yeah, you're right.
so it could be that they just
No,
said,
I
ah,
absolutely do. So
we'll do it
I
anyway.
deleted all of my
For a little
plans.
bit in an apartment complex
I
where
wish I could delegate.
Thanks for me.
Well, it's either that or
You know,
I got, thank you.
I'll go walk in and he doesn't want to do
Yeah, I'd
that.
rather not do
He,
Hey, you
he
brought a whole
preferred
stack.
to not do that. He preferred to be the technician.
That's
instead.
right.
which was not
That's what I do
So
in
we
Madeira
agreed, we
Beach.
agreed to that.
mine.
We agreed that he only had to do
So
that
we
one
weren't
place.
too anxious to.
I'd like to say that we held their feet
buy
to
a
the fire and they
house.
did it right,
Although I might have
because
you
we made them do
Yeah,
it right.
you know, he's like, you know, you
Call
see your boss's
in
boss on the
on
evening news.
when I'm at
I
conference just to
would
make sure they're
not,
okay.
Okay.
You know, 'cause he had
Just to
spent
make
his
sure
life
that
in
they
the
don't need
government.
you because I don't know that they'll call you.
And was like,
I've told
And
them
it's
to call
actually
you
easier for me
guys.
to come here than it is
we're
to
living in an
go
apartment complex.
Oh,
And
I
I've told
know.
them to call you
That was the
guys.
same.
I don't think you
Who,
need
who
to
are
be
you
here.
telling to call
One
me?
of the
Block.
Cheap.
Kim and Karen, if they have a
And,
problem
you
with
know,
it,
there's a lot
for
of
4 days, they
you
gotta
know,
go to
single moms, and
conference.
also the big thing that she had were the young ladies whose husbands were, you know, they're out to sea.
Yes.
Yeah, wow. Kids are sick, and they're like, what do we do? And, you know, so there'd be a sick kid on the couch when I come home from school because mom's got to go to work and the kid's sick. And my grandma's, yeah. So
And many lost.
Yeah, it's been fair.
They've learned.
My wife's practice is picking up, thank God.
have a
You
fever in
know,
the middle of the night or
all the
bumps and
time.
bruises, and you know,
Leading
young
up to
moms, they freak out.
the
They're
January
awful. They don't know what to
or
do.
January now was sort of Swiss cheese in the schedule.
Babies.
But I'd say the last
You know, today they would have Googled
month
it.
and a half, been
But, you
picking
know, then they have
up
her.
peaceful, and I'm starting. Yeah.
So I just, that's all I knew.
Yeah, I mean, I know.
You know, she'd raise her kids and
Yeah, it's going to. I mean, I get a good sense that it's finally changing. Yeah, it's hard.
That's good.
Oh man,
just what she did.
I wouldn't.
But even so, it's still
Did too when I was
admirable.
go to every
I used to just get.
because at 18 it was rough. I can imagine what it's like.
I used to just get cortisone shots in my knees because of I ran track and I
Well,
had
if you would
tendonitis.
just have to run,
Yes, but
Well, then article that
I
was
know
written
her.
that studies
Yeah.
show that like girls who like
We're hosting.
feel like during puberty and everything, and they put that kind of any of them that are athletic.
That's how I
put
grew
that kind of pressure on your joint causes early onset tendonitis and bursitis. And
Well, that's
I'm like,
why-
oh, all the things.
Yes, it
and it's very common for
is.
ACL tear, which is what I had at 18.
I am very lucky. I have not suffered an ACL or an MCL, but my dad
When
had
is school
he tore his
beginning now?
Achilles heel. He's done it twice.
Yeah, we
Because once you tear it once, it gets weaker.
Yeah. No, I had a whole toe reconstruction, which is awesome.
You do that. And,
Awesome. No, I have no arthritis.
The IT
He
band.
did knees.
That's
Patriots. He's a
good.
good guy. And he worked in little foot spot. I brought.
So we had so she's now. I think it's 7 o'clock.
hello, sorry, I'm just like,
how you
sit
doing?
down and turn my back
No
to you.
worries.
Like,
I understand.
Yeah, borrow this one.
Yes, sir.
coming in,
Yeah, that was me.
I was piddling around, and I was like, oh,
We about ready? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Adjustment meeting of August 23, 2017. Can we have a roll call, please, Ms. Heather?
Chairman Elliott,
Here?
Mr. Rabowski,
Here.
Mr. Burris,
Here.
Mr. Eisner,
Here.
Ms. Turner.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Glenzer is also here, and he can comment as a member of the as a private citizen, is that correct?
Not as an alternate. I mean, I'm just gonna ask that he not comment or ask any questions because he's an alternate on this board.
But he's a private citizen. He can still talk he can come to the podium as any private citizen, correct?
He can have public comment just like anyone else, but I would advise because he's a member of the board that if you can refrain from doing so, I would suggest that he refrain from doing so.
All right, let's begin with some comments from our legal counsel, please.
Are we going to do the approval of the minutes?
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Yes. All right, minutes to the July 26, 2017 meeting, please. Any comments? Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second, anybody?
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
No opposed? Thank you very much, Kim. Okay, now, I'm sorry. Our legal counsel, please.
This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Board of Adjustment acts in a quasi-judicial rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at this hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. Are there any members of the board wishing to disclose any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest this evening?
Nope.
Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak this evening, if you could please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn.
Sir, if you're going to be a witness, you need to be sworn. If you're not going to, then, okay.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
So sworn.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Erwiller, you have some comments, I believe?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a minute and introduce this gentleman right here. This is Louis Cerna. He is our consultant. The planning department is going through a reorganization, and we've now hired 2 staff members. That's going to pull me, training that staff and us becoming a team is going to pull me away a little bit from this board. So as a result, Louis is going to be stepping in probably for the next 6 months or so to kind of fill in for me while I'm working with our new staff. So I just wanted you guys to know that's why he's here, and you're going to see a lot more of him.
So if we have any questions about the agenda for the next several months, do we contact Mr. Cerna?
You can contact me, and if I think that you need to get in touch with Louis, I will get you in touch with Louis.
All right, so we're going to email Heather, and then she will deal with it, I guess is what the decision is. Thank you. Looking forward to working with you, Louis.
Thank you.
All right, we have 3 items on our agenda tonight. The first is an extension of a previously approved variance on Seabreeze Drive. Second is a variance just south of the middle school for a pool water edge enclosure. And the third is Kenneth Way, which is just near Howard Park, the old airport property, future development of a non-conforming lot of record. So if there are any objections to continuing with the agenda as scheduled, let's start off with 4A. This is a 6-month extension on the application 1589, variance to reduce the required side yard setback at 1654 Seabreeze Drive. I don't see Mr. Green in the audience, but he doesn't need to be here. Heather?
Yeah, Mr. Green came in and saw me a little bit ago. He's in the process of actually permitting his house, but he's hit some difficulties, and he's working through them with Anthony, our building official. And with that, he had asked if there was any way he could seek a extension, and I said that, yeah, he could get it, he could certainly ask this board for a 6-month extension. Nothing has really changed in his property, he just needs some additional time to work through some of the floodplain issues that he's experiencing. So as a result, the new date, if you choose to extend him the 6 months, his new deadline date would be by June 2nd of 2018 to have his permit complete. And I'm pretty sure that it'll be done by January. We just wanted to make sure that he had the full 6 months if he needed them, because I told him, you know, you don't want to have to come back and try to do that again. You'd have to go back through the process. So it's basically a 6-month extension, and then they have to come back completely through the process. So we're going to give him the full 6 month. That way he'll have plenty of time should he need that additional time. And so that's what is going on with this particular extension. I can answer any questions that you have, but none of the provisions have changed, and the request has not changed.
Any questions of staff?
Heather, is the extension, does that have any financial obligation from the homeowner? Does he have to submit any additional fees, application fees? I know, you know, when they originally do it.
No, there is no additional fee for this request.
Okay,
and we
that's
don't generally advertise them. They just go on your agenda. So folks, you know, they're not going to see the difference. They're not going to know necessarily the adjacent homeowners aren't going to know essentially that he's getting a 6-month extension.
Okay, because he's already paid his fee and all
Correct.
that. Okay, I'm just curious. Thank you.
Okay, any comments from the audience? Have there been any comments made to the planning department about this application?
No, there have not.
Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? For whatever limited value it might have, Mr. Green was a developer of most of the western part of Sunset Hills, and there were no problems when he was building, and welcome him back to Tarpon Springs. Okay, we're ready then. Kim, if you would please call the roll.
Ms. Turner,
Approve?
Mr. Eisner,
Approve.
Mr. Burris,
Yes.
Mr. Urbowski,
Yes.
Mr. Elliott.
Yes. Motion's carried. The next one is application 17-78, a variance to reduce the required distance between the pool water's edge and a pool enclosure at 1500 Poinsettia Avenue, which is, again, just south of the middle school. Staff, please.
Good evening, board members. Louis Cerna. I'll be presenting this item, and looking forward to working with you in the future. This request is to authorize a reduction of the minimum distance between the pool water's edge and the pool enclosure from 3 feet to 18 inches. The purpose of this request is to replace at the same location and setback an existing pool structure, a pool enclosure that was built legally prior to the current 3-foot setback requirement. The applicant has indicated that the existing pool enclosure is in need of repair and that it cannot be enlarged to meet the requirement due to the location of plumbing outside of the perimeter of the enclosure. We've reviewed this request in regard to the variance criteria of section 215.02B of the Land Development Code, and our findings are included in the report. Briefly, our findings are in regard to criteria 1, the physical surroundings are unique to the specific property involved. Our finding is that the need for the variance arises out of the site's existing legally non-conforming pool and pool enclosure. These structures were developed in accordance with the setbacks that existed at the time of development and create a physical hardship for redevelopment under the current pool enclosure setback regulations. In regard to criteria number 2, that the conditions or special circumstances are not self-created, our finding is that the pool enclosure and pool setbacks were built legally in 1987. This was prior to the purchase of the property by the current owners in 1999. In regard to the 3rd criteria, that literal enforcement of the requirements of the City of Tarpon Springs Comprehensive Land Development Code would have the effect of denying the applicant reasonable use of the property. Our finding is that literal enforcement of the pool enclosure setback will have the effect of prohibiting the replacement of the pool enclosure, which has existed here since 1987 and is in need of repair. Requiring the existing pool enclosure to remain as it is in its current condition or requiring its removal would have a negative impact on the subject property. In regard to criteria number 4, the granting of the variance will not confer any special privileges privilege is not allowed for other lands, buildings, or structure in the same zoning district. Our finding is that the granting of the variance will allow replacement of the pool enclosure at its current location, which is consistent with development that occurred at the time that this structure was originally permitted and which still remain in place in that area. In regard to criteria 5, the granting of the variance will not substantially diminish the property values of the surrounding area. Our finding is that granting of the variance will allow replacement of the screen enclosure at its current location. It would not adversely affect surrounding properties because the impacts will be internal to the subject property. Our findings are that this application does meet the criteria as noted above, and we are recommending approval of the variance from 3 feet to 18 inches, subject to the condition that the variance shall expire in 2 years from the date of approval by the Board of Adjustment.
Thank you very much. Any comments from the public? Any phone calls, correspondence at all?
No.
Questions from the board?
I just had one question, if you could possibly answer. When was the setbacks for the 3-foot pools, was that instituted in this Tarpon Springs?
It was after 1990. I don't know the specific year, but it was after 1990.
1992.
After 1990?
Further questions? Mike, are you finished? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I am.
Jackie, any question?
No, sir.
Boris?
Nothing.
No.
Haven't we had several of these variances over the last couple of years, right?
Yes.
And we've asked, what's the reason for this restriction, and no one can recall the reason why there is a setback? Or have we discussed that?
It's the section of the code. It's what the regulation is at this time.
Can I answer you?
Yeah.
In discussion, we've discussed there's a safety requirement that you need 3 feet around a pool enclosure so you don't trip and fall into the pool. That's where it comes from.
Were we unique in that area? Wasn't there a discussion about that? We're the only city that has a similar type restriction?
That is correct, that the building official has looked into this particular provision and has found no other instances of it in any other community. However, it is still a regulation in the city of Tarpon Springs.
Well, I was going to tell you. Also, it's legal for them, if they didn't have the structure, to have that distance. It's just when you put the structure up that it makes it break the code.
Is the applicant here? All right. The applicant's not here, apparently. So, are we ready for a motion?
Motion to approve.
I'll second it.
Discussion on the motion?
I would like to make a comment. I mean, once again, even in the letter written by the family, it says, "It is not within the financial means of the residents to enlarge the size of the enclosure to meet the 3-foot rule." So once again, financial considerations, which I'm not saying that's part of my deliberation here, seem blatant. And yet we are even getting a recommendation from the city to approve this. And if we were to follow the rules to the letter, we would not be able to consider that. It would be forced to tell this family that they would have to pour 3 foot of concrete, rerun the plumbing, at whatever cost necessary. Just more reason why we need to change the rules we follow. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? We've had a motion. We've had a motion.
And a second.
Okay. There's no further discussion. Let's have a roll call, please. Kim?
Ms. Turner,
Approve?
Mr. Eisner,
Approve?
Mr. Burris,
Yes.
Mr. Obowski,
Yes.
Mr. Elliott.
Yes. Thank you. Okay.
2 down, 1 to go.
And the last item on our agenda is application 1781, a variance to allow future development on a non-conforming lot of record. This is Kenneth Way, Golden Gateway Home subdivision near, between Florida Avenue and Howard Park, for those in cyberspace watching us, our vast audience. All right, we'll have some staff recommendation, please.
Yes, Louis Cern again presenting this item. The applicants are requesting a variance to allow for the development of a single-family residence on a non-conforming lot of record. This lot is one of 3 adjacent lots under a single ownership. There's an existing single-family residence located on the middle of these 3 lots. Section 24.02B of the Comprehensive Zoning and Land Development Code requires that if at any time the owner of such non-conforming lot owns adjoining unimproved lands, then the lots or land shall be combined to meet the minimum requirements of the code. The subject lot conforms with the R100A zoning district standards with the exception of minimum lot depth. So it technically is not buildable for that reason. Section 215.025 of the code allows for the granting of a variance to allow development on such non-conforming lots subject to the review criteria addressed below. And the criteria, I'll go through them briefly, is the first is that the lot consists of at least one entire lot of record on the effective date of the code. Lot 2, the subject lot was created in 1956 as a part of the Golden Gateway Homes Unit 1 subdivision. The lot exists in its same configuration and size as it was originally created. The second criteria, the lot was not created in violation of the previous zoning ordinance. The subject lot was created legally and is not in violation of the development regulations in effect at the time of its creation. Third, the lot was not combined with a neighboring lot under common ownership in order to allow the existing improvements on the neighboring lot to meet applicable setback. This lot was not combined with the neighboring lot in order to allow for development on the neighboring lot to meet applicable setbacks. The neighboring lot developed under the same ownership meets the lot dimension requirements, and the existing single-family residence met the setback standards of the zoning district that were in effect at the time of its development without use of the adjacent lots. Number 4, the Board of Adjustment may not grant a variance under this section if it will reduce the area or width of a non-conforming lot of record. This variance would not do that. The subject lot will retain its original size and configuration. So our findings are that this item does meet the criteria, and we're recommending that, based on this criteria, approval of the variance to allow for development of a single-family residence on this non-conforming lot of record, subject to the following condition, and it's the standard condition that it shall expire, the variance shall expire 2 years from the date of approval by the Board of Adjustment.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from the public?
No.
Is the applicant here? Would you wish to make a statement, sir? You got to come to the podium. And then we'll hear from the board, please.
I'm the owner of the 3 lots. The only
Sir, can you speak in the microphone if you can? Lift it up if you can.
This one?
Yes.
Got a light? Well, the only reason why we merged it into one was to save a little bit money on the homestead. But now we want to split it up. We want to sell the house and the back lot, but the new owner doesn't want the non-conforming lot. So that's the reason why we have to split it up now. But the non-conforming lot is 8,800 square foot, so it's the biggest lot in the neighborhood. But the one reason why the one leg is 91 feet instead of 100 feet. But it is a much larger lot than the rest of the neighboring lots. And there is a house already on the left of that lot on the 91 foot length. So I don't think that's a problem. And then Is there any way we can have it for 5 years instead of 2 years? Nope. Just have to renew it? Okay, thank you.
Don't go away yet. Questions from the board, please, or either the staff or the applicant? Let's take the staff first. Questions of Ms. Erwiller or Luis?
Maybe just a question to clarify, when we are measuring the dimensions, the lot depth, is that from the shortest or point or distance? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, my understanding maybe.
In this particular case, because you have two different ones and they're differing, you would look at the smallest of the two, because it's not, unlike lot width, lot depth is a little bit different, the definition is different. Lot width, you can take the average over the course of the property, so if you, as long as you have an average of whatever the distance is, there's 3 different ways to meet the lot width. Unfortunately, lot depth is not that way. So unfortunately, it's finely defined, and by finely defining it, that's where you get the need for this.
Yeah, because that's where I was looking, and I'm thinking, looking at, this document, yeah, where it looks like 100, on the conforming lot next to it.
That leg.
They go, they're going by that leg.
But there's a house already there.
Gotcha. There's a house there and a house there.
Yep.
Right. Thank you. So you're looking to sell lot number 28?
Yeah, with lot number 1.
Selling lot number 1 and 28 together? Okay.
Yeah. But not number 2. Yeah, like I said, the only reason why we merged them into lot 1 was to save a little bit. But that was a mistake. Because now
Now you're here.
talking to you friendly people.
Any further questions from the board?
Yes, I have a question. If we were to approve this change, it still would maintain that if there's a house to be built on that, it still has to have the same setbacks
Yep.
from the property lines, correct?
Correct.
Now I have no further questions. Just wanted to clarify that.
Clear?
I'm not sure I understand. You're selling lots 1 and 28, sir, is that right?
Yes. There's a house in lot number 1, right? That's my house.
Yes.
And these are empty properties.
Just for the record, that's lots 2 and 28 are vacant.
Yeah. So now the new owner wants lot 1 and 28, but not lot number 2, because it's a much larger lot. He does
Yes.
not know mine, so.
Okay, and so and what you want is lot 28 to be a buildable lot?
No, lot number 2 to
be
be
a-
a buildable.
Okay,
But the rule is that 91 feet needs
Gotcha.
to be 100 feet.
okay, all right,
I'm inches short.
okay, thank you. All right, are we ready for a motion?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Motion to approve and a second. Is there a discussion on the motion? I'd like to get into a little bit of history, but I know I'm not allowed. This has been a continuing problem with the Board of Adjustment for the last 40 years that I've been involved, and the board ultimately passed a resolution that said when you have 2 non-conforming lots of record in the same ownership, and one is vacant, the other one is buildable, whatever. We've had dozens of instances like this before. So, having said that, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Ms. Turner,
Approve?
Mr. Eisner,
Approve.
Mr. Burris,
Yes.
Mr. Obowski,
Yes.
Mr. Elliott.
Yes. Congratulations, sir, you got a 2-year variance. And if you need to extend, you know how to do it, or you'll find out, I'm sure. Thank you. All right. Glad to have you in Tarpon Springs. Great. Next, staff comments.
I only have one comment, and that's right now I currently don't have any applications for the September meeting. Unless something comes in the next 2 days, you may get a cancellation notice from us. Just want to give you guys a heads up.
We've been let go.
Not yet.
But we still get paid. All right, board comments. I have one. We had our work session a couple of weeks ago. Right before I went into the hospital, by the way. I was in the hospital the next day, but I managed to escape. And the board made some recommendations to the city commission for changes to our land development code. Now we need to get those recommendations, once we approve them, which is now going to be apparently 2 more months, because there's no meeting next month. So the minutes are not ready from our work session. So it's going to be October probably before we can approve the changes that the board has made for recommendations. You with me so far? We need to get that to the city commission. And normally that's done with some kind of a letter of transmittal. So I've drafted something today. I'd like to get the board's thoughts about this. It certainly is not written in concrete or stone. It's in cyberspace, so it's easy to make changes. Any thoughts about getting this to the city commission and then future steps thereafter?
I would just ask that we table this until you actually have, and because the work session is a session where you're not actually able to make any active decisions, that we table this discussion until you actually make a motion on that, which is going to have to go on the next meeting agenda, so that that's advertised to the public and the public has input.
So the discussion concerning, you're saying that you're recommending the discussion of the transmittal letter be deferred for 2 more months?
Correct, because this transmittal, and understanding that whatever the decision you made at the work session is obviously not a binding decision, because no active decisions can be made at a workshop, that it has to be a regular meeting or a special meeting, that this basically says that you're already approving it, but that's not actually come before this board for an official vote. So I'm just saying, understanding it's a letter of transmittal, I'm just asking that we put this on the same agenda on where you're going to vote on that same issue, and then you can have that discussion at that time.
Kind of like a package deal. This is the letter, this
I'm
is
not
the
asking
recommendation.
I'm not asking for a vote on this. I'm just asking for comments.
And what I'm saying is you're asking this board to comment on something that you have not taken official action on.
Well, we voted 2 weeks ago.
You can't vote at a workshop. You cannot take official action at a workshop. You can only do so at a regular meeting. So what I'm asking is that you table this until you take actual official action, which is going to then go to the Board of Commissioners. Or you can do so informally. I mean, this is not in your code because technically this board doesn't have the power to do this. But if you're going to do it, it needs to be done at it needs to be done officially at a meeting. So I would
Are
just
you
ask
saying
that
I
this
could
be-
do something, we could do something informally tonight?
No, I'm saying that because you don't have a provision in the code that allows you to even make these recommendations to the Board of Commission, and this is a special dispensation, if you will, that came down from the Board of Commissioners, that unless you're going to have staff recommend whatever was discussed at the workshop directly to the commissioners, or if you're going to go directly to the city manager and have him present it to the commissioners, if you're going to do it as a board and you want to make it official, then it needs to be done at a regular meeting. It needs to be put on the agenda to give public notice so that they can participate if they so choose, and that it needs to be officially voted on before we have the discussion about what a form letter looks like, already approving something that you've not actually taken official action on, if that makes sense.
All right, so that being the case, we're having no further action, and the meeting is adjourned at 7:30.
You want mine?
You okay with it?
Yes.
I already had discussion with the mayor.
I know. Reading it wrong.
Okay, we can do the discussion when we come here.
Easy peasy.
Three pretty basic cut and dry. Nice.
You're supposed to have an eight.
Vertigo.
Easy. Come at me with that hammer.
Hello.
I was here, but I'm not a double bank.
Are you gonna let him know that that can't go on letterhead? Or is Mark gonna let him know that that can't
It's
go
too
on
hot for you.
This one was. Wherever,
Whatever,
whatever.
I'm gonna suggest that can't go on city letterhead. This board does not.
We voted.
We'll see you next
I
month.
mean,
Maybe not.
in all honesty, they don't need a
Sierra
letter
House?
like that. They can
Yes,
just go,
indeed.
one of them can just go to Mark. Well, and, yeah, and tell him.
Really?
Ace Hardware. She's like,
They've got a recording.